Locust Grove, September 8th, 1825. Dear General, your letter of the 15th of the month was received by me last week. I have not heard from my mother since her arrival at Pittsburgh. Inform her that everything goes on here exceedingly well. The women have dried a great deal of fruit and are at their houses spinning wool or cotton or something of that kind. Old Nanny officiates for me in the cooking department. 2 churns are going daily, and Alfred goes to market almost every day and gives the profits to Laraway. I got some white Havana sugar and made some peach preserves, about 2 pounds, I suppose, and with all due deference to my mother's knowledge on this subject, I think they excel that of her make. I would like to send one of the jars to Anne. I shall keep a pound or so against my mother's return, and send the remainder to Serena. Request Charles and all of them to write to me directly in Louisville. If I am not here, the letter will be forwarded. I have not heard from George for a long time, but I am told Orleans is healthy. Yours truly, Dr. John Cron.
So we're here at historic Locust Grove here in Louisville, Kentucky, and what you just heard was part of a letter from John Cron, right? To his mother? Is he talking to his mother or his brother?
Yes, so John Cron was actually writing to his brother-in-law, Thomas Jessup, who was a general who lived in Washington City, or Washington, D.C., as we refer to it now, with John's brother Anne. So this letter is actually written in 1825, which is after John's father had passed away. So at that time, his mother was actually going and living with her children in places like Pittsburgh or in Washington.
So this particular letter was written in
1825.
1825.
Yes, this was written September 8th, 1825.
And we just heard a little piece of the letter, right?
It's a much longer letter. This family really kept up with each other, and it's wonderful because they tell each other all these little details about their lives and give us this window into it.
Right. So we get to find out what this estate was like in 1825 in this particular letter. Now, we've got preserves mentioned in this letter.
So I love this letter, and I absolutely love John Cron. His letters are so entertaining, but he does sort of put out this challenge and say, my preserves are better than my mother's preserves. So we're going to actually do a taste test today.
Okay.
We've got some preserves here, first of all, that come from Amelia Simmons. So this is
1796.
96. This is right when his mother had moved in here and was the lady of the house. So this is from Mom's time. Now these are made with using brandy. They're preserved in brandy.
Oh yeah, they're preserved in brandy, all right. Now this hasn't gotten real mushy yet.
No.
Probably, these are pretty fresh, right?
Yeah, we made these recently because we're about at that time.
Right.
So there's certain peaches that actually you do harvest in the fall that are intended for preserving. So we've just set these in, and they would keep for 6 months to a year.
But they aren't terribly sweet.
No, that wasn't what these peaches were made for. The peaches that are sweeter that you use for pies and jams really came in the spring.
Right, and the brandy is kind of heavy in this, so there's a lot of brandy flavor. There's some definite peach flavor there, but not what we would consider.
Not what we're used to.
Peach preserves. Yeah, so, but we're going to be doing
We're going to compare this with a recipe from Mary Randolph from the Virginia Housewife from 1824.
Which is exactly this time frame.
Exactly.
And this one's going to be a good bit different. How do we get started? Well, we'll try out this recipe after when we're done with it. How do we get started on the Mary Randolph recipe?
So Mary Randolph, we're going to start, there's no brandy in this one. We're just going to start by paring our peaches.
Okay.
So grab a knife.
Okay.
And we'll start paring them.
Okay.
And then we'll slice them. Okay. All right, now once you've pared a peach, there is actually a trick to slicing this.
Right.
So what you're going to do is you've pared your peach. You're going to find the natural crease in the peach and slice around. And then first you're going to quarter it. And then I'm going to do this in eighths. So I've gone around 4 times. Once I'm done, then we come around the center. So we've actually sliced the peach on the pit, and then we twist. And ta-da! All the pieces come off. Some of them you have to still pull off of the pit, but still the easiest way. Now, one thing I will say, for Lucy Cron's day is that the recipe from Amelia Simmons actually has you blanch the peaches first, which does make this a little bit easier.
Right. So we've got these guys paired. What's the next step?
All right, so we're supposed to take the same weight of the peaches, and we have 2 pounds of peaches here, in sugar, and so 2 pounds of sugar. And we talked about this is one of the big differences between the 1796 recipe and the 1824 recipe.
So how do we do this one?
First, we're just going to put a little bit on. What I have found works the best is actually not to put all that sugar on at first. So we're going to actually just toss these peaches in the bowl, make sure that they're covered in sugar. I might add a little bit more here. She has you have these sit for 2 to 3 hours. So what I've found works best is to keep coming back through that time. What's going to happen is the peaches and the sugar are going to start creating this wonderful syrup. And so we're going to just keep coming back and adding more sugar and sort of tossing it up. And then we'll create this wonderful syrup that's going to preserve these peaches.
So while this is kind of doing its thing, right, making its own syrup, we need to come back to this over and over again. While that's doing that thing, tell me a little bit more about this letter and who's actually doing the cooking.
Right. So I said this is one of my favorite letters. I love this letter for so many reasons. It really shows us the different levels of the hierarchy here at Locust Grove. So John talks in this letter, he says, "Old Nanny officiates for me in the kitchen." Nan was an enslaved woman here at Locust Grove. He says old Nanny to his brother-in-law, so we kind of have extrapolated from that. Okay, she was probably here for a long time, probably here when the kids grew up. She might have been their nurse. But this is why we know the name of the woman who actually did most of the cooking and the work in this kitchen. So everything we're looking at here today is what Nan was doing. And
so even though John says my preserves, he actually means preserves made
by
here.
Nan, And I love John so much. I love his personality, but I look at this letter and I say, wow, John, in one sentence, when you say my preserves, you have challenged your mother and ignored the work of this woman. But I mean, like you say, I understand. He thought he was the master of the house. This was his. But we love it because it just shows us so many of the people who were here at Locust Grove, as well as the crops they were preserving, with the food they were making. It's such a lovely slice of life.
He couldn't have done better to tell us what was happening in his day, even if he was like, hey, 200 years later, this is what was happening. This has been sort of percolating here for 10 or 20 minutes, and it definitely is starting to pull some of that moisture out. Now we need to
just keep adding the sugar. You can see it's already got this lovely syrup forming. And we're just going to keep putting that sugar in there.
And that'll just keep pulling the moisture out. Good. So these have set for what, an hour and a half, 2 hours? They're nice and gooey. So what's the next step?
So we can definitely see by now what a 1:1 sugar to peach ratio gets you. So now,
diabetes.
Well, people burned a lot more calories.
Exactly.
At the time, we're just going to ladle them into our pan. You want to use a pot that's not too deep. And in fact, that's actually probably about as much as I would do in one go. Right there. We can put in another batch if we want to. And then we've got what is actually almost too thick at this point. So we're going to add a little bit of water. Not too much.
And it calls for adding water?
It says to add a little bit of water. And then we're going to put it over the fire.
I like those precise measurements.
You know, enough.
Yes.
And just put it over till, quote, thoroughly scalded.
Thoroughly scalded, whatever that might mean. I mean, I think scalded, I think just flash hot, but obviously that can't be true here. We have to get everything hot here.
We're going to get it hot and then cook it down a little bit again to a syrup.
Do we cook it down? Is that what it says?
You're absolutely right. It says to put it down until thoroughly scalded. Take them out with the ladle, draining off the syrup is the next instruction.
Because, I mean, when I think about this, I think the whole process here is really just to kill off the bugs.
That's true.
Right? So we're not seemingly trying to cook the peaches as much as just getting them hot enough to make sure that it's killing everything off.
You're right.
That would be my guess.
No, you're absolutely right. But what's really happening is that we have to make sure that we cook down whatever water we've put in here again, so that we do end up with a really nice syrup for preserving these in.
Okay. Off they go, onto the fire.
And here we are over the fire. It really is eyeballing it, you know, looking at it, making sure the syrup looks good. She does say that if you don't have enough syrup, you can put it back in with more water and do it again. You can add more or less water, really until it just looks like you say you've taken off the bugs before you preserve it. You've got a good syrup, but the key is you have to make sure that you have enough syrup to cover the peaches, but it really doesn't take as much syrup as you think. They're gonna pack
so we're gonna
down
have leftover
into that. I've found that's not running out of syrup is not usually the problem. Now that these have been thoroughly scalded, we take them off the fire and let them cool for a moment. Then next, we're going to gently scoop the fruit into the jar. And then we're gonna cover that up with some of this wonderful syrup we've created here.
And we want that syrup to come all the way up over the top, probably?
We do want that now. The peaches will try to float in the syrup, so at some point you do need...
Gonna have to give up on it.
To sort of, well, and you can push a couple in there, and there they go.
Okay, so we got our little lid here, but that probably isn't the best way to seal. Now today we would, you know, put this in a glass jar, a hot bath, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
What is her description here?
Mary Randolph does have a solution for this, and you're right, the lid is lovely, but that's not what she recommends. She actually tells you that once you've put your preserves into your receptacle, put letter paper wet with brandy on the preserves and cover the tops with many folds of soft paper that will tie around closely.
So what she's doing is cutting a piece of paper the size of this on the inside. She's brandying it and laying that on. Now, that's sort of similar to the idea of, you know, pouring like paraffin on the top. Or,
exactly, it's creating a seal with something that's antiseptic.
Right.
So in Amelia Simmons' recipe, that wasn't necessary because they're just covered
They
in
are brandy, yeah. Can't go wrong there.
Well, and now we see Amelia Simmons used a little sugar, lots of brandy. Now we're using lots of sugar and a little bit of brandy just to provide that seal.
Right, and so we would put that little brandy paper on there, let that sort of seal the air from the top, and then we would put this lid on and then cover it with paper
and tie it up, and then store it somewhere that's dry and
cool
safe.
And all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So now it's time to try this one. This one you made earlier, right?
Yes, these are some preserves we did before.
Okay, so what have we got here? You got one of the seeds right up on top.
We do, actually, yes. Our last batch, we were able to get a few of these actual seeds out of the pit. All right. And she just did, Mary Randolph included that as a sort of extra, hey, if you want to, you could include this.
Right, and I've never really heard about seeds stored in sugar syrup before, so that I thought that was
want not. There's another one.
Look at that.
There we go. All right, John, you are the judge here.
I gotta test it. I gotta test it. And
let's see who gets better bragging rights.
Well, that is a lot like
Yeah.
what you're going to find at the store today. Let me go back and try one of these again. They're completely different animals.
Yeah.
Just day and night difference.
So I wonder if maybe John's bragging actually spoke to changing tastes.
Changing tastes, or again now, but we're just trying them out of the jar.
That's true.
Now they may have eaten them just out of the jar, but you could also, I think these might work better in a pie than those. I don't know.
Though those are almost practically, you wouldn't have to cook that very much, especially after it's sat there longer.
Right, and we definitely have something going on here between these 18th century, and this is a typical 18th century style of preservation, and then this is happening in this 19th century time period, and there's a good reason for that, I believe. Probably sugar becomes a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
Possibly brandy gets more expensive. It's hard to say.
So who won?
I don't know. I mean, if they're two different monsters completely.
Yeah.
This is what you would get today if you opened up a can of peaches. Those are good. Those are great. These are something different.
And I think we see it morphing here more into the kinds of foods that we're used to today.
Right.
So I wonder if John's bragging was partly just based on his being part of a different generation than his mother.
All right. I think if I wanted to serve something different to people, and I wanted to say, you know, 18th century cooking, it's the same, but it's different.
Yeah.
This would be the thing I would choose to show them as an example of that,
right,
rather than, hey, this is the birth of the modern preserved peach that we're used
Absolutely. And I think today we might come at something like this as a special dessert rather than a method of preservation. You know, I know I've been at dinner at people's houses where they say, oh, let's take some fresh peaches and pour brandy on it. It's just a very different mentality.
And light it on fire.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. If you're interested in more information about Historic Locust Grove, make sure to check out their website. There'll be a link down in the description section of this video. And I want to thank Amy and everybody here at Locust Grove. We're having a wonderful time. There's so much great here, so make sure to come and visit this. If you're ever in this Louisville, Kentucky area, make sure to check out Historic Locust Grove. And thank you for watching today.